I would call this meeting to order. What's today's date? I know. It's funny. I looked at this January 19th, 2023 at 3:34. Sorry for the delay in starting. I'm going to turn things over to Mary Ann. Today's an exciting day, I think, for our town as we continue to march forward. Good news.
Great, thank you. You're correct. Today is an exciting day and it is good news. As the council and the public all know, we started a search committee for a new police chief some time ago, late August, early September. And I'm pleased to report that this evening or this afternoon, I'm prepared to present to the council my recommendation and asking for the town council's advice and consent for our new police chief. Just to provide a little background, the search committee consisted of 5 people, including myself, 5 folks from the general public, Ken Lacoste, Kim Gafford, who is here this afternoon, Molly O'Neill, who's now a councilwoman, I'm sorry, Keith Lane, and Captain Peter Shabbat from Rhode Island State Police, who at that point was serving as interim chief. We had a number of applicants. The committee reviewed the applicants independently, and based on that independent review, they selected 5 applicants to be interviewed. And as true in Block Island Farm, we had the interviews all set up and Mother Nature decided that she was not going to cooperate. Ferries were canceled for the day and we had to reschedule all the applications. And I'm like, oh my God, here we go again. Soon after that, we did interview the 5 candidates. The committee recommended that we bring 3 of the 5 candidates back. We did bring 3 of the 5 candidates back, and the committee further suggested that what we should do with the 3 candidates is bring them by the police station and also by the chief's house. So they'll see where they live and where they work. And we did that. The committee also put the responsibility of taking the 3 candidates to myself and Keith Lang. And they said, based on what you come back with as a recommendation of chief, the committee will agree with that. So we did. We brought the 3 candidates out. We spent a good 4 hours with them, morning and afternoon. We split it up. And based on that, the committee, Keith and I came back with a candidate that we'd recommend to the whole committee, and that candidate is John Lynch. John Lynch has just retired, or is retiring as of February 1st from the Wilton, Connecticut Police Department, where he served there for 37 years, almost 37 years. The last 6 years has been as chief. He also serves the town as their emergency management director. From an educational standpoint, John has a bachelor's in criminal justice and a master's in public administration. He also graduated from the FBI National Academy. He also is Connecticut's post certified. Currently, he is not Rhode Island certified. He is in class work. To get that certification, I anticipate that certification most likely will be finalized probably by mid-February, late February. That's when I'm anticipating. And so at this point, I would like to present to the council, John Lynch as your new police chief.
Welcome, John.
Well, thank you very much.
You got to push the button and make sure the green light comes on. There's a
David Lewis will help you. He's very good. Does that mean I get the green light? Okay. First and foremost, thank you for having me. It's quite an honor to be here in front of you. I'm kind of humbled by this whole experience. I'd like to thank the search committee for their diligence and Mary Ann and Charlene as well. My wife and I visited Block Island in the summers. And when this opportunity came up, we were both very excited. So here I am now. And between that time, I was able to visit at least half a dozen times. And we were amazed at how the spirit of community is important here, similar to where I come from. My style involves being connected with the community. if it's a problem for somebody in the community, I'm here to listen. I may not necessarily agree, but we'll work it out to a great resolve. We did get to visit the chief's house and the police station. And I was surprised at how nice the police station was compared to where I came from, where a lot of work needs to be done. So I think we really fit in, and it's a place that my wife and I would love to live here year-round.
Wonderful.
Again, I go back to my community roots. It's been in my blood, and it's what makes me tick. So I'm available 24/7. I accomplished a lot where I was, and I understand I'm not gonna go hungry for a while because my plate is very full here. So I'm very humbled but honored to be here, and thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, John. Any questions from any of the members? No? If not, I would make. Great.
So I say that with a grain of salt. I think, no, thank you. I didn't want to go on and on. But, so I think when Marianne brought me, she thought I was going to think differently. We fought hard. I was part of the process for 20 years. Our building is like 50 years old. So we finally, this past year, were able to get it voted for a new building. And so I leave it in good hands. But that's kind of why I said that, is because their dispatch center is bigger than ours. And you know, we're 18,000 people, 45 officers. So
Oh, God.
anyway, so I'm really looking forward to problem solving. I know there's a lot of issues. I'm well versed. I've been, you know, I'm aware. So I will be open-minded and meet with all the stakeholders. I enjoy that. So thank you.
Thank you, John.
Just one question, your timeline, I know you're officially retiring, I think on the February 1st or something like that, or?
Yes.
And then you'll be out here in February, because the reason I ask is, without starting to go right now, I think there is a lot in the plate. And I always think, and Marianne and I have talked about it, about just officers and personnel, and especially given the way police numbers are working these days, it's going to be a lot of work to make sure we're supported in the summer. And so I hope early February we'll see a lot of it.
It'll probably be mid-February,
sure.
Targeting the 13th. You know, retiring the 1st. My wife and I need some time to transition, and so I need that little buffer, but I'm also attending classes at the academy. So hopefully not too long after I start, I'll have powers of arrest and certified. So,
Congratulations.
Terrific.
thank you. Thank you very much.
What's the form of the motion?
I would make the motion as it stated on the agenda. You discuss and make the motion based on the advice and consent to appoint John Lynch
I would,
as the police chief, effective upon receipt of Rhode Island certification. He will come and start working before then. However, he can't be the chief.
right.
certification.
I would make a motion to provide the council's advice and consent to the town manager on the employment of John Lynch as the town of Zoo Shore chief of police to become effective upon receipt of his Rhode Island certification.
Second.
Any discussion of that motion? If not, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Congratulations.
Aye.
Opposed, no. It's unanimous. Thank you, John. Welcome.
All right.
Speed traps on Cooneymus Road.
You know, Dave Lewis is actually our West Side representative. We're very colloquial out here,
Exactly.
parochial.
So we will reconvene at 4 p.m. For the remainder of our of our agenda.
Perfect.
Hello.
Okay.
Call this meeting of the New Shoreham Town Council to order. Do I have to do the date and time again today? Okay, great.
Yes.
Reconvene. We are hereby reconvening. Hi, Allison.
Hello, I'm here.
Thank God.
Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you so much for making the time to do this. It's totally fine.
All right.
I think informal is better.
Feeling close enough.
Hey, Joe. If anybody in the audience is having a hard time hearing, just stand up and wave your arms.
Okay, there we go.
So perhaps to my, I hope I didn't make a mistake by doing this, but I specifically didn't sort of put out a bullet list of things to discuss today because you folks on planning will remember, and Sven and Martha will remember, it was prior to Neil and Molly joining the council. I am one of those people. Kim Gaffett and I maybe are the two people who frequently go to planning, go to planning board meetings who are not on planning. And I've always thought, hey, Chris, and I've always felt that planning is where a lot of the important long-term work on the shaping of what the community looks like, what our values are, et cetera, takes place. So at one planning meeting, we were discussing, you guys were discussing, I think it was probably one of the housing ordinances, accessory dwelling units, or perhaps the large house ordinance. And it occurred to me that there were probably parallel conversations occurring at the town council and at the planning board, and that there, as much as we, I bump into Chris all the time, or I bump, whoever, there wasn't a lot of quasi-formal interaction and kind of joint direction setting and getting a sense from each other of what we feel like the challenges are, et cetera. So I wanted to have this meeting first to thank you guys for, I know how much time it's been, particularly over the last year. It's been, there've been so many sort of broad policy questions, but also challenging filings, for individual development ideas. So thank you. And second, to sort of just have a conversation about what you guys are seeing as challenges, what you'd like to focus on. We can do the same and talk about we can talk about housing being a priority and ensuring that the ordinances on the one hand don't pose an obstacle to the development of affordable housing, but on the other hand retain the character of the town we love. I do worry some days that the island is changing a lot from what Susan and I fell in love with. But a lot of that is the market lives and works and breathes, and so being kind of sane and rational and consistent is important. And I think to appeal to your planning minds. I know Sven feels this way, and I think my other colleagues do. I think this council is very, very much committed to sort of one of the common themes is not just dealing with things episodically, but having an actual long-term plan and figuring out how things fit into those. We can spend all of our time, as Neil and Molly are realizing at 4 meetings in, you can spend all of your time on things that are instant and have no time left for anything else. But we need to make time to be doing the sort of long-term thinking that we need to be doing. And to me, a primary locus for that in our town government is the planning board. So not to put too much on your table, but that's what we have to be doing. So anyway, I should say, I was thanking the planning board. I also really want to thank Jen Brady and Allison Ring, who really work so hard for our town, frequently without people knowing how hard they're working every day. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Allison. I'll look at you. That's my long introduction. Allison, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Where are we on some of the accessory dwelling units things, ideas? I know. I heard
Well,
Chris-
we've had some recent adopted amendments relating to accessory dwelling units. So those are in place to encourage the creation of additional accessory dwelling units. And then of course, the town accessory dwelling units that was reestablished. So those amendments are now adopted or in place to allow for the creation of those units. There's also, I believe next month on the town council's agenda, a public hearing, again, related to another section of the zoning ordinance related to accessory dwelling units. And this is specific to state law change. So we'll get into that next month. It's a minor change, but the policy or the policy that Chris Warfel had brought forward, he drafted specific language for an ordinance for accessory dwelling units. And so that was submitted to the town council. The planning board was sent a copy and we started looking at that. I think it's a big conversation and some maybe policy decisions to be discussed prior to determining specific language, because it gets into it's encouraging the development of accessory dwelling units utilizing public financing. So actually providing funding for development, creating housing units on private property that are owned by a private individual. So and it also allows for additional incentives related to local tax policy. So something I did refer it to the finance director and to the tax assessor, just so they are aware of it. And so I think it's kind of a bigger conversation than just planning to be able to kind of weigh in on it at this point, unless we know that funding is available and the community wants to use it for this purpose. Hard to actually advertise an ordinance and adopt it without actually having that policy implemented, is my opinion.
There's a bit of a chicken and egg there. I get it. I say that I happen to be a supporter of at least exploring the idea of capital subsidy for the creation of accessory dwelling units. That's on some level. provided there's a commitment in exchange for public money of maintaining affordability. So I think it's worth, you know, it is very much worth the ongoing conversation and work.
Yeah, it's definitely worth exploring. It's just, yeah, we need to have a conversation as a community and determine if that's something that is something the town council supports, and how would it be financed?
Mhm.
And the specifics, how would it be? I think there's probably a lot of specifics that need to be worked out as to how it would be managed. Once it is implemented, who would be responsible for deciding how much is given to who?
Oh, of course. Yes. That's, you know, when you start a new program, you have to figure those things out.
Who figures those out though?
I think the town council will,
Well, I've got
you
a
know,
follow up on that,
yes.
which I think is sort of where Chris is going, Chris, Willie. How do we have any kind of process, any kind of control, any kind of procedural guidelines on who submits what? You know, I think everybody wants to encourage anyone to participate, but you know, we can't just have people writing ordinances and submitting them to the town staff to spend a lot of town time, effort, money on. It very much chicken and egg. I mean, is that something that you know, we really even want to look at?
I mean, I'm not sure I agree with you. I actually think the process ought to be open to people suggesting and proposing ordinances.
But suggesting and proposing, an ordinance in terms of a guideline, in terms of an outline, in terms of a concept, is one thing. Actually writing ordinances that are just going to have to be rewritten.
Right.
It seems like that causes more,
Right.
a larger expenditure of time and effort than would if we agreed where we were trying to go in the first place.
No, that's a really good, interesting point. And you know, one wonders whether the process could, because what happened there is an ordinance was drafted and proposed to planning. And planning is required basically to engage on it. And it raises an interesting question about whether the more appropriate thing would be to send a proposed ordinance to the town council, and the town council sort of decide whether it's something the planning board ought to, you know, might want to spend time on.
Well,
I
wasn't
don't know.
this, I mean, wasn't this ordinance a byproduct of the discussion of affordable housing 6 months ago?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the individual took it upon himself to,
Yep.
Chris Warfel took it upon himself.
Yeah.
And we thanked him
Yeah.
to draft something that was very similar to like, or basically he amended, I think, some of the things that we already had. So in that respect, I think it was productive.
Me too.
But to Martha's point, as far as process, like if somebody wants to propose some pick any off the wall ordinance about anything,
Right. Exactly.
I see the process being necessary, but in this case, I think this was a byproduct of the process.
Totally. I think I'm with both of you guys. I mean, I think what Chris was proposing, whether you're for it, against it, or think it needs work, was a good faith effort from months of work on a lot of ideas.
Right.
But the question that Martha asked procedurally is a really interesting one.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Margie and her group, you guys are sort of bound by the charter. So you could theoretically have someone, theoretically, who at every planning board meeting comes with 3 proposed ordinances.
Yeah,
And,
but I've
you
been
know,
on the board for
uh,
20 years.
you
We've
know-
had probably less than
Right.
5.
Yeah,
over
I
a
don't know
20-year
if
period.
if that's a practical matter, that's,
It's a
you know,
practical
but
matter, but however, I do agree that there is some kind of process in place
yeah,
because we don't want to waste our time or your time. I love dealing with gray areas. That's one of the reasons I love the planning. board,
yeah,
Is we look at something and we can see all the ramifications. It isn't a black and white issue. And there is a need for this gray area, so to speak.
mhm,
But then again, we do need a process on how to make it work most efficiently.
The only problem of I agree with everybody on process. I think the only concern about it going to the council and the council deciding whether it's something we want to work on is the planning board is a longer term body.
Yeah.
It's a longer term structure. And so I don't want a shorter term town council saying, yes, we want to take that, or we don't want to take that versus
point.
a longer term planning
Yeah.
cycle. And so whether a process is set up that potentially goes to the council as a vetting, but is copied to the planning board, and the planning board could say, you know what? I don't care what, we're gonna pick this up and run with it.
right, right.
But
Good point.
isn't fully burdened by the charter. I don't know. But I think there should be if I'm a citizen, how do I make sure, people are actually doing something? Because there have been times in the past where, at least when I was on the planning board, some people would come and they sort of ask and ask and ask, and it would take a long time for actions to start to happen.
Yeah, and to play devil's advocate, we, the planning board, don't want to spend hours on something only to send it to the town council and have you guys shoot it down.
Which is part of the underlying rationale for this meeting is to, we ought to be talking,
Okay.
Back to what Allison brought up was the concept of using public money. And my question is, planning board and the town council, no offense, aren't
No,
the people to formulate that program. So who do you get to formulate the program? They can conceptually, we could all conceptually agree with it, but there's got to be actually the nuts and bolts behind it, like the application, the money, the due diligence, and who does that, where the money comes from, et cetera, and how,
I think the housing board needs to be involved in this probably also.
absolutely.
I'm
but
not
I-
sure they
yeah.
want to do all that or even are capable of doing all of that. That's
You
what
know-
it may end up having to have somebody on staff that is,
Or bring.
contractor.
Or yeah, actually, that's what direction I was going is.
Okay,
Is.
sorry to take your thunder.
No, is, the housing board is the same thing. Again, you have a group of volunteers that are, I don't think should be responsible for being the architect of the program. I think we need to find either a private entity, a group, somebody has the experience in that, in the financing of projects like this to be the architect of the program.
Mhm.
And so it's done, basically correctly.
And I'm not sure whether, sorry, you done? I apologize. I'm not sure whether the program is funded by the town or it's a program developed in concept by the town and is funded in part by the state. And, the workings with now that the housing czar is gone and we've got somebody new, how do we get them involved? And should they be involved? Do we want them involved? So I just think I think the first step, to Chris's point, is let's get alignment on what the vision is. Because Keith, I think, while you and I agree on almost most things, I'm not sure I'm there on this one. But it takes a village, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've also suggested that grants be looked at to fund programs. We've also talked about offering incentives, maybe tax break of some kind to an owner who builds a affordable accessory apartment over his shed, garage, whatever. So there are a lot of options that we need to look at.
Keith?
Yes.
Where my frustration lies is in the lack of time, period, but in the lack of time spent on, frankly, on brainstorming, I so welcome the opinion of just about anybody. The planning board will be discussing some ideas I brought forward. And hopefully we'll come to some kind of consensus. But I hunger for more interactive discussions, period. And I realize that that means extra time, maybe not at a regular planning board meeting, but periodically during the year, whereby even, I may be sticking my neck out
No,
here,
go ahead.
but even, yeah, right. Let's say the planning board does not, thank you, does not agree with my ideas, right? And I potentially think they're great. I'm not saying that's how I feel, but let's say I do, then I feel that there ought to be an avenue whereby I can be heard so that other people's perceptions can perhaps add to the solution. So that's where my frustration lies at this point. Our meetings are packed as it is.
Right.
Yeah, our
Yes,
agendas
our agendas are packed.
are long and we work hard in preparing. So, and we realize that many of the things that we do with are in a timely manner because people have to have contractors coming in. We have to work around weather issues. So, it
Sure.
isn't something we want to drag out for 6 months if we don't have to.
So have you given any thought to what that looks like? I mean, is that,
In my imagination, I see us, meaning the planning board, meeting with you guys, meeting with other departments of the town, having public group discussions,
Mhm.
even if nobody comes up with a fantastic idea. If you listen to many different ideas, there are components in each one of them that could potentially be combined. Or it may just trigger a whole different concept. It doesn't matter. I just feel that that kind of exchange is so invaluable. That's my feeling.
Can I build on that a little bit? But I'm going to take a very different bend. We have one of the, at least per the state, one of the best comprehensive plans in the state. And the planning board did a lot of work on it, and by chapter, high priority, medium priority, low priority. But there are initiatives, there are ideas, there are kernels of ideas, and some numbers around them. I will bet you in this room, there's probably only 4 or 5 people that have looked at the comprehensive plan, not just carried it, looked at it in the last year. And there aren't many, and I bet you most of the town council hasn't looked at it. And I'm wondering whether that's a place to start. I mean, it's a great document. Do we do just tackling a chapter or tackling 2 chapters and saying, hey, what
Okay.
should we be working on these? Shouldn't we? Should we add? Should we not? I'm just saying, we've got a lot of meat that's gonna sit there and will be in the next comprehensive plan and the next one unless we do something. And so I think a lot of work's done.
Well, Sven, when that came out in 2016,
Yeah.
I mean, the suggestion was made that every year, the top priority, the immediate, like, because my question with this is like, this is great. But with a lot of these things that the town produces, it sits on a shelf. People forget about it. We did it because we had to do it.
By law.
By law, but if you're not, I mean, I say you, the town council, isn't, or maybe it's us, I don't know, the planning board isn't like reviewing that, not the whole document, but our list of priorities all the time, just to see if they're being done, then what use is it?
But I'm with you. That's why I'm bringing it up. I'm with you. I think it is the planning board, it's the planning board document. I think it's the planning board that should be doing and the town council. And I guess to Sosha's point, I think we do need to have more thinking meetings where there's not 17 agenda, like last night. I go 19 agenda items, and by the 17th, you're so brain dead, you don't want to talk about something that's really important. Here, maybe I'm kindling your idea. Maybe we take 2 chapters, go through those high priorities. Think about whether they're still priorities. It's 7 or whatever, 6 years old. Maybe it's changed. Unfortunately, I don't think it has.
I don't think it has, and
I have
housing
a
is one of the priorities.
Yep.
And, you know, Sosha's point earlier, though, like brainstorming, we brainstormed about housing ad nauseum. Like we have.
Yeah.
We've been talking about housing forever.
Yeah,
I don't know what other ideas, like, you know, and you can have as many meetings as you want. You can talk as long as you want, but it's the actionable things. And like, what can we take action on and keep moving forward? And the ordinances that we reviewed were part of that, right? We're facilitating, making it easier for 513s and things of that nature. And then the meeting that we had, is it the 9th? What's the next meeting? Don't we have a meeting? The 8th.
Yeah, we're working on 519.
Right.
Yes.
You know, so we have been making strides, but, and then that, you know, the housing, Cindy, you present us with a conceptual for another 5 homes at the last planning, but didn't we see that somewhere in the plan? Was that 2 months ago?
That was rental.
It's,
So 16.
16
Rental, it's rental.
The duplex there, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, that's on the horizon. And we had a discussion a while back, all right, what's the actual need, right? So I thought that was already done. I didn't participate, I mean, I'm the one that suggested, I wasn't sitting on planning or town council or anything of that nature. I think it was like, well, what's the inventory so we can focus our attention on what's needed? So we should have all of that. Yeah, already. So we have to turn it into action, right?
Well,
And-
you have the inventory all.
Right.
And you also have the implementation part of the comprehensive plan for housing, planning, conservation, parking group. Sitting on my desk because I was looking at it last week, we need to send this out again.
Right.
Keith, could I jump in on the comp plan discussion? So last year, we submitted the town, a 5-year implementation report. So we went through every single action item and every element of the comprehensive plan and reported to the state the status of it, if it's been completed, in progress, not necessarily a priority for one reason or another. So a lot of the work you're talking about was recently completed, and there probably are more updates since then. That was now several months back. So, but that it's been started and we can build upon that.
Hey, Allison, this is Keith. Could you do us a favor, at least me a favor, and send that implementation report to
Yes.
Marianne so that can
Yes.
be distributed? Because shame on me, I don't remember reading that. But I mean, but
No, this was before you got on the council, so.
Oh,
you may
okay.
Not have been copied.
well, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. I didn't. Believe me.
Yeah, we
I had
will-
I had a
we-
role where I was supposed to have read that.
I was trying to get you out.
Well, it's the planning board submitted that on behalf of the town, right? It's the comp plan is owned by the planning board. So yes, that will be I'll pass it along to Marion will circulate it to the town council and we can resend it to the planning board too. And but certainly, knowing that the 10-year required update is coming, any work now to get the document more current will make it easier when the update time comes. And also, communities are also welcome to do to amend their comprehensive plan during the 10-year timeframe. So if you feel like there's some significant policy changes and things that you want to incorporate into the comprehensive plan, we can also amend the current comprehensive plan. So it's a tool for you to use to implement
How
changes.
how far out do towns start redrafting their comp plans, Allison?
At least 2 years they should, it does take, that's why comprehensive plans used to be a required 5-year update, but because it's so long to do the updates, they changed it to a 10-year. approval.
And we're in year 6
Yes.
of
this-
ours. So why don't we have a meeting, say February, March, where we go over, we'll work with the council and Marianne and you and Margie et al. To just come up with an agenda item to a work session item to go over the implementation report, et cetera. Just, and maybe that'll be a good sort of foundational thing to prod some ongoing conversation around this stuff. Does that sound good, Sosha?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
But also to Shoja's point about brains, like, I think having a focused discussion, brainstorming, I think is the word you use. Because I mean, Sosha came
Yes.
to the table last meeting with 2 pages of ideas.
Uh,
And which is great. I think it'd be even better if we look at those ideas and like, I'm gonna just talk about the financing.
And
end
say,
of it.
talk about,
That
yes.
should be the focused discussion.
Yes.
When it comes to.
I totally agree. I'm
Not
yeah.
everything else that we've already hashed out.
And quite frankly, that acts as a governor on my own inclination I could talk about anything for 2 hours that you throw
Right.
in front of me. So, being
Financing
focused.
has kind of been our bugaboo. We've got regulations in
Right.
place. But how do you implement them? And that basically comes down to financing.
Great.
A lot of it does.
Proposed amendment on your agenda, then
Right.
town council and-
Right.
You need to act on.
All right.
Keith, on that subject, and again, if everybody is in support of it and we move forward, I mean, I think an action item is then to bring that to the state or to, with Amy and Marianne, where are their vehicles to do this?
So you say, you just said, bring that to them to do this. And I don't know what
So in other words, if we align on a finance that we want to do financing, or we want to set up some sort of capital relief or whatever.
Gotcha.
Whatever this financial incentive is, I think the critical next step, a little bit to Chris's point, is what do we do with that?
Yep.
We all agree with it, but rather than it sit there and sort of be in a committee structure, we figure out, okay, we take it up to the state, or we theoretically take it to the voters if it's going to be, if we
Yep.
think that it's a voter based, versus sitting on the shelf. And I think we need to give ourselves some timelines on that,
Sure.
because otherwise
That's a good point.
it'll be
Yeah,
here for a
absolutely.
long time.
Lord knows I could yak about it for the next 5 years.
Probably the first thing you really want to do is be sure that there isn't something already in existence,
Well,
which I think is the problem when we start talking about. It's always been the problem. Pretty much any study you want to talk about, you can go in the town hall vault room and pull it off the shelf if you know where to look. And, the world always begins when somebody shows up. There's an awful lot of stuff that's out there that we don't seem to ever, everyone likes to say we put it on a shelf, but we don't just put it on a shelf. We put it on a shelf and then 10 years later, we do it over again,
Right.
which is a
Um,
lot more frustrating.
And I think if as long as we're talking about housing, one of the things we have to acknowledge is the 2 most promising things going on are really moving. The project that Cindy's doing and the Thomas property, the stuff around accessory dwelling units, et cetera, is an attempt to get the market to act, to sort of create some additional units, whatever that looks like. To your point, Chris, like I don't know how necessarily the financing for something like that ought to work. I just know that to the extent that we can provide people with some incentive. I mean, no one is going to come out here and develop affordable housing. Ask Cindy Pappas. I mean,
right. And I think the research has already been done.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
No,
I
right.
think that we're not the only community that's in this situation. So I think, and I know Sosha did a lot of research on the suggestions that she brought to the table. And I think I've done none of it. I've done no research on the financing end of it, but I'm sure it exists and we figure it out.
In the past year, I've had 3 phone calls
possible. I wish someone would make a proposal. It's great that you got calls.
Well.
Hey, I've got a question, Jen, maybe,
I mean,
Well, I know that I would at least like to hear about it.
well,
That's a good thing.
I want to know,
There's no speaker there,
Speaker.
but you can borrow it.
what is the law now with affordable housing? Remember way back 20 years ago when they threw everything out and you could build anything you wanted to build as long as you had like a very small percentage of it was affordable
I thought that. was
and
it.
everything.
That had too many problems and they. got rid
But
of
what
very
did
quickly
they got rid
thereafter.
of all of it or is there some part of that left? I think there's some part of it. left.
Are you referring to the comprehensive permit?
I think so.
Allison, you can probably address that. That is-
Yeah. So I think what you're referring to is the comprehensive permit. So in communities that have less than 10% of their housing stock considered by the state to be low and moderate income housing, they are subject to having a developer come in and apply under a comprehensive permit where at least 25% of the units have to be deed restricted and they don't need to follow local zoning law. New Shoreham has more than 10% affordable housing, so they're not subject to a comprehensive permit.
Okay, that's answers my question. Thank you.
Which is why we try to maintain 10%.
Yes, because I
And
don't.
didn't
want
we
that to-
fall below that? And isn't that how we ended up with Seawinds, right?
Yes,
Right. So lesson learned?
I hope.
Don't slip.
I don't know.
Which is a good example of where long-range planning is needed. Because we need to at least know which town properties might be suitable for construction, should we need to go that route. We also have a build-out of about 500 homes still on this island that are possible under the existing zoning. And for each year-round resident added to the pool, you need to add affordable housing.
Can I bring in one other component that is, people have been very concerned about, and that's enforcement. With the new regulations that we passed and 518 and 513, there is the potential for abuse. And I've been stopped a number of times in the post office, library or whatever, and people are saying, what are you gonna do about enforcement? I said, I don't know, but we're going to bring it up to the town council and talk about it because there needs to be some person or group of people whose job it's going to be to make sure that these new ordinances are not flagrantly abused. And I'm not quite sure what the process is or how we want to go about doing it, but we need some kind of inspector that's going to be in charge of going around and checking on this.
That would be me.
I know, but you physically cannot do all of it. You're gonna have to have somebody.
We bought her a Kevlar vest for Christmas.
There's a few parts to that.
doesn't want-
There's a sheet right here too.
Not-
Okay.
So there's a few parts to, if you're talking about enforcing, I just talked about this yesterday. If you're talking about enforcing the affordable units or the 513s, the 513s, we will, or the town is enforcing those units. But the projects like the 20, the Pilot Hill, that's up to the homeowners association.
Yeah.
That's how the documents were written.
Right.
So it isn't just one way to enforce it. The documents were written, the homeowners association enforces some of that.
And the 513 is specific, and
Yep.
even during my tenure here, there was already the enforcement taking place, so every 2 years.
Now it's every 2 years. It was 3.
Yeah.
They go out, they look at it, everything's done, they get the affidavit, they get copies of lease, and they do that, so that will continue to happen, and that's been going on in the town since the 513s have been in place. But Jen's right, as far as other places where it's a board or a housing association have no jurisdiction,
Right.
none whatsoever.
And I've been asked numerous times, like, could you write a notice of violation for this particular project for this reason?
I mean, the town has first right of refusal on any of the sales of the,
Depends on the.
Depends on the
project.
well, I think I meant,
Some of them are different, but I figure if 4 or 5 people are stopping me and are concerned about this, there's another 2 or 3 dozen out
Yeah.
there that are very concerned or looking for ways to abuse the
Right.
ordinance. So we
Ma-
need to be aware of this.
Molly had a question.
Yeah, so I have a question. I'm definitely on the bandwagon that is concerned about enforcement, but I just want to back up a tiny bit. Because, so if someone puts in a 513, that's not necessarily affordable, right?
That's correct. But if
So
you
my-
rent it every week, all summer long, that's a flagrant abuse of.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
That's fine.
Right, but I'm just saying it year round is not necessarily the same thing as affordable, right?
No,
There's a
the
there's a
five-
definition for affordable.
Right, the 519 would be affordable. The 513 and the 518 are not necessarily affordable.
Right, so my
It's
my
your-
question is this then. So we're putting in these new ordinances to encourage more 513s, right? But at what point do we start to cannibalize ourselves on the affordable, right? So like, at what point by encouraging more 513 units, do we sink below 10% and make ourselves vulnerable to what we were just talking about? Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
513s, don't count towards the 10%.
they don't.
No.
Okay, so I didn't know that. That's-
And it's just one of the tools. It's to create
Okay.
year round, so.
All right, that was my question.
those
I didn't realize that they didn't count towards the,
Yeah, the 513 is really purely around year-round housing.
Mhm.
And it's at any market value or whatever value they want. The 519, which you guys are working on finishing now, right?
Yeah.
519 is
Is
affordable. And
And 518 is for families, handicapped, families over 65. But what we're concerned about is somebody who say, we'll use 513 for example, has it and finds that they're renting it out from June 1st to September 1st weekly. And
Yep.
is a flagrant abuse of the 513 and it's not being checked on or enforced. And then maybe they give it to a teacher who uses it during the winter time, but it's not being used year round. And this is what I'm hearing from the community as far as they want to make sure that there's enforcement, a component that goes with all of the
There-
suggestions.
and what you're hearing, just to make sure anybody listening, every other year, there's a review. I know,
I know
it
that-
was done last year at least. And at this point, to my knowledge, and Jen, you can confirm it, there are no major 513 issues.
Okay.
Correct.
Could be one here because things change and
Yeah.
that will be addressed. So I just want to make sure that
And
when
and
you
I
meet
keep
people.
saying
on the
that
street-
because you're right, people look at Zoom and they don't read the whole, listen to the whole thing. So yes, I'm happy to have that.
And there's a process, if someone suspects there's a violation, they can fill out a zoning complaint form and I can do an investigation to see if it's in
Good,
violation.
we need to say that because neighbors sometimes get very fed up and there should be a process by where they can ask for a check and if there's a problem, have it corrected.
Clear.
Ooh, Molly. Go ahead, Molly.
so here's another thought. This isn't really a planning issue. This would be a more council. Is the town of Westerly just put in a short-term rental license? And that is something a lot of towns are doing. And that would be an enforcement tool that we could look at. So it would be a little bit of revenue.
I like that.
But if we had a short-term rental license, then it doesn't matter what platform you're using. You could be using a real estate agent locally to rent your house. You could be using Airbnb, HomeAway, whatever you're using. You have to have the license. And then we would have a further enforcement tool that someone could use, right? So in a conversation I had with Jen, she was saying it's not really the 513s that are a problem. It's when somebody's, renting a space on their property illegally and it's not a 513. So that seems to be a problem. And I think I can see where neighbors would have an issue and not understand that that wasn't a 513, right?
Right, because 513, I'm as guilty as anybody. I use 513 to cover the whole range of
Exactly.
accessory dwelling
Exactly.
units.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it, you know, I acknowledge it's all 513 to me, and that I need to be more
So-
disciplined about that.
Further, I mean, like to go, to follow that further out, right? Then the town would have a record of everybody who's renting a short-term rental out here. And then when it comes around to this time of year, when we're saying, have you remitted your 1% tax? And if you have a short-term rental license and you haven't remitted your 1% tax, we can contact you. We have your phone number and your email and your address, and we just say, Mr. Smith, you know, like, we haven't heard from you. We need your 1% tax. And then that further bolsters our affordable housing because that's income for affordable housing. And I think there is some confusion on that right now, because I have heard people who are confused about because it's self-reporting. I think people are getting with it a little bit more now that the more years it's in, right? But because it's self-reporting, some people misconstrue that as optional,
Yeah.
right? Like when you get to the cashier at Job Lot and they say, do you want to give $1 to the Jimmy Fund?
Yes,
That's
right.
optional, right? I think they're misconstruing this as like an
Interesting.
option.
Yeah.
So this would give us like another tool for that income.
So
Anyway,
Molly, could you work with Marianne and Jen and see if you can sort of get the background on that license and see if there's anybody, for example, from Westerly who would be willing to attend one of our meetings by Zoom to walk us through what they did? And Allison, yeah. Do you mind doing that?
no, I don't mind doing that.
Great. No, I mean, I think
Yeah.
we should talk about it.
What you say, that tax can be used to pay a person who would be responsible for going around and checking all of that.
Right, right. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
I mean,
How can you fund somebody
Yes,
to do
Chris.
this? And that would fund a person who would work for Jen and
So-
go around.
and also like,
I-
so obviously I'd be curious to hear like the probably not so great feedback on that Cindy would have, because it's a pain in the neck, right? But yeah,
Cindy's had her hand up for quite a while.
Oh, sorry.
You can't see him from where you are.
I've kind of lost track of what I wanted to say a while back, but.
You want to come use my.
Your point about licensing, just FYI, in case people don't know, state of Rhode Island this year instituted that everybody must register. They're not calling it
A license.
a
but
license.
Yeah.
But they.
It's a
they're
registry,
supposed to
yeah.
register.
Yeah.
And that's for $50. Anybody who rents their house on a short-term basis. That's one. And then going back, 5-10 minutes ago, I just wanted to underscore some of the difficulties when we talk about enforcement. Housing, grassroots housing efforts have been taking place for 40 years out here by most notably BED, and then followed by the Long Island Housing Board. With every project, you'll learn a little bit more, learn from your mistakes. So I would like to just underscore that the projects that the Long Island Housing Board has done to date, do require the people that bought those homes to swear every year, send out an affidavit, asking them, reminding them, these were the rules. This is when you bought this house at this wonderful price. These were the things that you agreed to, that you were going to be owner occupied, that you were not renting the premises, that I can't remember all the
Yeah.
things. And we get an affidavit from them every year. And I feel pretty confident that the housing board projects that we have done, that the people are really following those rules. I could be naive, but I feel pretty confident. Some of the groups, the housing that has come before that did not have those mechanisms in place. So there could be a little bit more wiggle room. And perhaps,
some issues that people are talking about. But I would like to, Jen and I were just having this conversation the other day. It's my opinion, and I could be wrong, but regardless of what the homeowner association rules and regs are, which the homeowner association should be saying, you know, to their members, gee, if you're parking in the wrong place, or if you have, you know, unregistered vehicles in your yard, the homeowners association does have something to say about those issues. But in my view, the zoning ordinance of the town, super, you know, it's an umbrella over all housing. So, you know, if you are a single family dwelling, no, you're not supposed to have a second kitchen. You know, that to me is if, again, if that happened and someone put in a complaint, then the zoning officer is obligated to take a look and see what's happening. There is something on the books, I don't know whether it's 7 unrelated people or something like that are not supposed to be occupying a house. You know, so there are rules and regs that are in the zoning ordinance that are not fun to enforce, but in my view, it is an umbrella over any kind of housing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to get this
Yeah.
enforcement on the table because it seems to be an issue.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I look to Jen and Mary Ann and Allison to tell us if we need to be investing there, you know? Because I mean, I know from having served on zoning, how much, you know, what's on your plate. And as a practical matter, you know, I don't know what that looks like.
I don't know of any that are in violation right now. I
Mhm.
don't have any zoning complaints in my office about
Right.
housing. I hear it, but it's mostly the accessory structures.
Right.
But no
Cindy?
one fills out the form. I mean, if you fill out the form, we do the investigation.
Yeah. Kim
If-
or Cindy?
Just one more thing. I had a awkward conversation with someone who was telling me, you know, these abuses, which I really think was urban legend or island legend more than truth, but be that as it may. The other thing is that, I believe in our ordinances, anywhere, you're supposed to get a license, but anybody in any zone is allowed to rent up to 2 rooms.
Yes.
Yes.
And that applies to affordable housing as well as, if that's, again, the overriding rule on the books.
Yes.
And I think that could also be confusing to the general populace, you know, to say, oh, you know, look at, there's an extra person in that house. They could be legitimately renting a room, just like you or I could be.
But Cindy's correct. That is in the zoning ordinance and it is inspected by the minimum housing inspector. But you can't rent your accessory residential structure.
I'm
That's
talking about single-family
clear
homes.
in the
Right.
zoning ordinance. But those aren't on an annual or inspection process of any kind. The only time we would go out and do an investigation if somebody filed a complaint.
But the town can, to the extent of any of these dwellings being, so we went through this with moorings, believe it or not,
Right.
years ago. Like
Similar thing.
when I was harbor master, it was, you know, you're not allowed to rent your mooring. Well, someone put their mooring in Soundings magazine that it was for rent. Okay, and we confiscated it. Like you can't rent your mooring out. There's plenty of accessory dwellings, to Jen's point, that may or may not be rented. But how do you figure it out without a complaint? This was brought up 4 years ago because Newport was going through the same problem. And all they did was gained access to what they call the back door for VRBO, Airbnb, all those platforms. And just a private firm did it, but it did a cursory check and, just vetted it against their records. And it cleaned up an awful lot. I mean, an awful lot. And that wasn't because somebody, that was a collective town, because of the short-term rentals were becoming what Newport considered a problem. That was the avenue they took first. And then I think they went it as far as what Westerly just did with the licensing, but they also zoned off no short-term rentals in certain parts of town.
Right.
So, you know, this, I don't like the notion that you have to, you know, call your neighbor out in order to have anything done. I mean, if the town's serious about it, there's a little bit of homework that can be done. And then, you know, because after that sounding magazine incident with moorings, we just literally looked at other publications and online things online, and it wasn't just one,
Yeah.
you know, so there's another way to do it.
Yep.
I'd just like to reinforce what Chris just said, because it's been my opinion for a long time that this town loves a charade which says we enforce anything where we get a citizen's complaint. And I think you can't rely on that in today's day and age. People don't want to be considered snitches, and especially in a small community where everybody knows everything. So we need to get serious about that in this town in every respect of the things where people are subject to violating rules that we all take for granted. Some people do and some people don't, but we're kidding ourselves to think that we can enforce solely by citizen complaint. We need to put money behind it, but before we need to do that, we need to put data behind it, which gives somebody, and gets to the registry portion. You need to be able to mine data that you collect on your own, so that in fact you can find these with your own. You can be your own citizen complaint as a municipality. You can be your own citizen and find the people on your own that need to be enforced. So simply put, we need to make a commitment that we intend to do that as a community. Otherwise, this is just talk. You need to take enforcement seriously.
I think that legally, you have to have a legal right to go onto someone's property and to have access and gain access and to even, like, that's a legal question, and
The mechanism that I mentioned wasn't literally, there was no access needed. You just call the person up that has an accessory dwelling, you're like, why are you renting it out?
oh, yeah, you could definitely look on.
Right.
on the
But
site
as far
to
as
see.
complaints, like you need a citizen complaint to actually gain access, right? Like that's the mechanism that I think shouldn't be necessary if we're serious about it.
Okay.
It's.
Chris?
Yeah.
Did you say they hired a firm?
So Newport did only, and Jess, my wife knows more about this because she's the one that presented the idea 4 years ago, but they hired a firm because of the number of short-term rentals that were in Newport. And I don't think it's comparable to here. I think they have far more than we do.
Yeah.
And I think so does South County, because South County was,
Yep.
but I'm not sure what the inventory is here, so it didn't make sense, but they did hire a firm. And it was basically, for the lack of a better word, it was a bounty for everyone they caught. They got a percentage, they got money, and and it was worthwhile for them to do it. And I don't know what criteria they were using. I don't know the details behind it, but that was the beginning of what Newport has now for their ordinances regarding short-term rentals and zoning violations and things of that nature.
Well, anybody who spends any time on the internet like I do, you're going to find things rented for rent, like everywhere.
Right.
That just stunned me. And I remember, I think it was 30 years ago, there was a guy who worked at a sewer plant who was from Westport, Connecticut. And he said back then, their land use department in Westport, had somebody who was going to, at that time, it would have been the newspapers, the classifieds. As your town hired somebody, it's that bad? And this is Westport, Connecticut. They're having such trouble with zoning violations.
So I guess Keith and Margie, because you're both chairs of these groups, we have to decide and to use David's words, if we're really gonna go and follow through on enforcement. And while David, I agree with you that complaints and people won't make complaints because of, what we don't want to do is get on the other side, which is we are driven by the rumor mill and everybody starts talking about everybody else without any facts. So Chris's example is a good fact-based one. And I think that's the most important thing, is that there's some meat behind it. And then how you approach it versus just going and starting to fine. It's okay, let's investigate, and there's a process. That takes money and it takes people. And that's just an investment decision that we need to do. But I guess as a good output of this meeting or the next one, we should decide as we're getting into the budget process, how serious we want to be about enforcement.
That's why I brought it up tonight.
No, and I think I even mentioned, everybody's talking about this. And I think this is a little bit of the time, do you put the chips down or not? And make a decision.
Yeah, I mean, and Margie, I mean, the planning board knows every time we propose something, I'm right there with enforcement. And anytime we're making modifications to, I don't want to say relaxing existing ordinances, but making it more accessible, I immediately default is, all right, what's the loophole? Okay, and then loophole, and then what's the enforcement end of it? So it does come up, and I don't want, it shouldn't be a deterrent to move forward with any of these, but we have to have that,
This is a component that should be.
a component that should be,
That goes with it.
that has to,
Because
it's
if
like you
if
could pass.
People are getting away with it, the next year you're gonna have 30 people who are trying to get away with it. And it'll snowball, and then we have really got a problem.
Right, and you could probably look around this, I could look around this room and know that there's numerous zoning violations already going on. So I would,
Yeah.
you want to be really clear with enforcement in the direction that you would like it to go. Because it's,
Right.
it's definitely sticky. And
Yes, it is. I didn't say it was easy. That's why we brought it up. And I don't know exactly how you are going to fund it. And if we're going to do
Oh, I
this
think
part of
we
it, then I also think we need to look at the B and Bs and so forth. I've seen, it's said on the internet listing for Airbnb. And some of those have got to be in violation.
well, no, because you can do Airbnb as a single family dwelling, and you can also use Airbnb as your 2 rental rooms, which is
Right.
legal. You just can't have a kitchen, the extra kitchen. I mean, it's easy enough to go through some of those sites to see.
Renee, sorry, you were screened.
This doesn't have so much with what Molly said about the 1% being voluntary. I think there's a big confusion because of what the State Division of Taxation did. And the Division of Taxation does not understand any of the rules about these short-term rental taxes. But they are collecting a 1%. And I think maybe people are, and they say it's on behalf of the town. So I think one of the problems might be a big confusion when people get that form, they're like, I already paid it through the state. Just something to think about. I have seen that as an accountant, with people dealing with those monthly taxes, that there could be a lot of confusion. Right
Interesting
there.
point. That's why, Molly, I think we need to get smarter on some of that stuff, if you don't mind doing that. No, we do. No, you don't, I do.
It's on the
You're-
table. That's what we need. Then we can go from there.
You're plenty smart.
Well, I'm sorry, but Marty, I agree with you. It's on the table, been on the table for many years. So I
Yeah.
guess
It's sort of on the back burner for a number of years. I don't know.
I don't think Chris is back burner, and I know my back burner. So I just think this is where in the budget process, and maybe one of the things, Mary Ann, you can do is if one were to build, not the cream de la creme, but a more resources, or be able to go out and get some third parties, and it is on a little bit of a commission I don't know. I mean, there's got to be a couple of ways to do it. So let's talk about that through the budget process.
Yeah, and it would be great if it were not a general appropriation. You know, if we could figure out a fee-based structure that finance something like that, that would
Yeah.
be,
Well,
that would
Westerly
be
sounds like they've got
ideal.
a pretty good idea.
Let's
so we'll
figure
go
out
with
what they're
that.
actually going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. You can't do all. you
And
can't
then
do
I know,
everything.
I know we've gone over an hour here. I want to, so we have that follow-up item. We have a conversation around sort of the financing and implementation of a potential 513 subsidy. You have your planning meeting in early February.
Yeah, February 8th.
Talks about this stuff. I'll definitely be there. I think, I'm sure perhaps others will be as well. But also, I'm going to schedule for all of us, anybody who's interested, to have Allison and potentially others come in and talk about the comprehensive plan implementation report and use that as a, hopefully to identify targets, because I agree with Chris, so that our brainstorming is targeted on actual policy objectives as opposed to kind of, wouldn't it be nice if, the sky were blue every day? So hopefully we can accomplish both things. But thank you guys so much for taking the time. This is really helpful. And I think a good conversation to have regularly.
Thank you for inviting us to come. We really appreciate that.
Been to your party.
state and or federal. And I'll take the easy one. On the federal level, at least from my point of view, that should be on the list, is the Maritime Center, which the facilities director presented last night. It should also be on the town, excuse me, on the state level, but I think there's probably more federal opportunity, but there's a whole lot of infrastructure dollars within the state, as I think most of you know. The other one, which I'll talk about, which is a little bit more state-based, and for Molly and Neil's benefit, we right now, as you look at our tax structure, property tax structure, we right now have one tax rate for the island. And so whether you're a resident in RA or you're commercial or it doesn't matter where you are, everybody has the same tax rate. And last year, we started as a discussion, and it got a little jumbled up. We started as a discussion, is that right? Should we have an incentive? And again, this is all land tax, right? This is all about real estate. Should we have an incentive if you have housing? You offer affordable housing. Should we have some incentive if you have year-round housing, maybe not affordable? Should there be incentives to try and drive the kind of culture and the kind of behaviors we like? Should there, in my opinion, and I'm very happy to be public about it, if you're renting your house on Airbnb for 8 weeks and you're making X dollars, should you pay a higher tax? All those renters are potentially adding a burden on the island, whether it's police, it's rescue, it's fire, it's roads, it's congestion. And so the ability to have that flexibility in the tax structure is something we need to get permission from the state. So the capital has to provide us, what's the right word? They have to provide us the ability to do that. We cannot right now institute a variability in our tax structure. The only thing that we can do is homestead.
We have a blunt instrument, but not a fine instrument.
Yeah, but it's literally, we are allowed to do a homestead, and that's it.
We can do homestead?
Yes, that is any city, any town can do a homestead.
But doesn't it have to go through some process?
It has to go through a town process where public discussions, public policy, etc. But it doesn't have to go up to the state. Enabling
The
legislation, that's
legislation's
what the word I
already
want.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
So-
what action is required by the town?
The town would have to go through the process of probably through an ordinance or something like that.
But we don't have to go up to the Capitol. So what we did last year was we went up to the Capitol. We had very good success at the Senate. And basically it was enabling legislation to have the discussion. Let me repeat that. Enabling legislation to have the discussion and to try and decide as a town how we wanted to have our tax structure. It got shot down in the House. Actually, it didn't get shot down, really. It never quite made it to the
Pass the Senate unanimously.
passed the Senate unanimously and then never quite made it to the floor because there was some folks that were very worried that this would not be a good action for the town. I'll try and be nice about it. And so it just never made it into the House floor for a vote. And my hope is that we can talk about this idea more and that we can put that on a legislative agenda. So it's enabling legislation for a variable tax.
This, I agree with you. I think it's a very worthwhile conversation and type of advocacy. But I think it would be worthwhile at some point soon to something that was very helpful for me last year as a newcomer was conversation with Amy around what we can and can't do, so that you particularly you guys have a basis in the existing underlying statute. But this is part of a theme where we want to have a tax system that reflects relative burden.
I thought there was also some consideration of taxation that that already exists in other towns.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite as complicated as this. And I think that's where the wheels tend to fall off the wagon
There
for
are,
us.
my recollection, and this is part of the reason I just made that suggestion. My recollection is that there are two things we can do. One is create a homestead exemption. So if you're a homeowner, you get whatever, an immediate X off of your assessed value. The other is a differential rate between corporate and rental.
Yeah.
Excuse me, corporate and residential.
Commercial.
Commercial and residential. I think Sen kicked me under the table. Those were both, as I said earlier, quite blunt instruments. You know, you know, I get it if you're in a town where that factory is clearly a commercial
Yeah.
property, that house is clearly somebody's house, you know, and there's not a lot of question about that. But in our situation, there actually is a fair bit of variability and varied uses of, if you drove by, you would say that's a house. Well, actually, that house is an essential part of someone's multi-home ownership business of renting, you know, doing rental rooms or, you know, whatever. So what we were after last year was an alternative to the ability to do a more refined model than those two especially blunt instruments.
Martha, to your point, last year, I think this is what you're talking about. Last year, there were 3 or 4 other towns that were doing the exact same thing we were. And it was about enabling legislation. And I think in total, there were 5, including us, and the 4 others all passed.
That's
And the reason
I'm
the 4
going.
others didn't, the reason we didn't pass, to be very blunt, is Steve Philippine and a couple of people went up to the Capitol and got different lobbyists and drove the cart off the rails.
And I think there was also a fair amount of misrepresentation on how much more they were alleging they would be paying than they in fact would be.
For Molly and Neil, to Keith's point on Amy and why we need Amy to walk us through this, we can't raise the total tax revenue more than 4.4.
So the tax levy cannot go up more than 4%.
Right.
The legislation that we're looking for, the enabling legislation, it was already in place in a number of communities. It's called the tax classification. It's, I'm looking at the legislation we proposed from last year. It's 44-5-11-8. It's called tax classification. There are a number of handful of communities that already do it. Keep in mind the tier tax system that we were talking about, you cannot have a difference in the classifications. You can't have it more than 1.5% higher. So that was also already in the legislation, and we could not change it. So our legislation that we were looking to put before was the exact legislation that other communities already have in place. And there was about, Sven is right, 3 or 4 of them that were already looking to do something else. The communities that already have that legislation in place include, I'm looking here, Coventry, East Greenwich. What town is this? And there was few that were doing it last year. So the language that we were proposing was the exact same language that was saying, it says here, if I read this, notwithstanding the provision of the subsection A, and it talks about the town council, it says the town of East Greenwich. Ours was the exact same language, except it says the town of New Shore and applicable to tax assessed on or after the assessment date of December 31st, 2023. So we were implementing it a couple of years down the road.
Yeah, I think the only point I was trying to make was that we weren't looking at a 10-to-1 ratio on commercial versus residential. And I think that's the sort of thing that was being thrown out there. And I think it's really important that it be clear exactly what we are talking about locally as well as upstate. I mean, upstate is going to know, but I do think there was some confusion or some manufacturing confusion locally.
We. Yeah, great. Anybody else like to talk about this?
So I just want to, like, I like that idea,
Mhm.
right? Because if you read the report that the Tourism Council paid for on the invisible costs of tourism, right? Businesses are attracting and generating just that, right? The people who are using their like bathrooms and police services and garbage and roads and you name it, right? Having been a business owner out here for over 35 years, I don't want to clobber businesses over the head either because, um, you know, you need people to be coming out here at the same time, right? But I do think it's a really good one to pursue because yeah, they should be paying more taxes. You know, and not, I'm not going to pick out any one particular business. It's just that business property. The only thing I would say is if we decide to pursue a short-term rental license, you'd have to be careful about clobbering people more than once. You know, like if we're going to pursue a short-term rental license, this would be specifically for rental houses, right? You'd have to be careful about, you know, recategorizing somebody's home as a business for tax purposes in addition to the license. Does it, I don't,
I think it's really challenging. You're right.
it's really challenging. I just
Yeah.
want to like put that out there. I know that we're going to do a lot that like this will go a lot further and this isn't the
It's-
time to
it-
get
it-
into details, but I just want to
No,
say.
I mean,
like,
I think it's really worth continuing to have these questions and talk about it because you're right. It's, you know, uh, is it if I rent if I rent an unused bedroom in my house for 2 months in the summertime, am I all of a sudden now a commercial property? You know, like it's not, it is not easy.
Yeah.
You know,
But But what we did say last year, and to be very honest with you, incredibly frustrating part of this discussion is we want to have this conversation.
Yeah.
But right now we can't because we can't do anything with our tax. Right. So it's not like we could move one lever up and one lever down. Again, to Mary Ann's comment, it's only 1.5 points up. So you're not talking huge swings here. We're talking nuances. But we can't have, well, we could have the discussion and then we go up to the Capitol and say, we really want to do this. Could you give us permission, Dad? But the hope was we go to get permission so we could have the conversation. Because right now it's
Mhm.
very academic without the ability to act.
It's entirely out.
But I do think the whole, I mean, the house rental out here is a tremendous industry.
Mhm.
Everybody knows that. You probably don't have as many hotel rooms as there were in the Ocean View. I mean, the entirety of them.
Mhm.
And that was one hotel,
Right.
albeit the largest, but nevertheless, I made my point. And that's a big, and we all know, you have several, there are a lot of people now, well, it seems like there are a lot of people who have, oh, so-and-so owns this house, then they own this house, then they own this house. And, you can't have a home in 5 different places.
Oh, David, thank you.
I know what I've heard, somebody else, but again, somebody else needs to confirm. My understanding, everybody was renting, has an obligation to register. From that date, municipality, I'm sure.
it's my understanding, we've asked that question, and I don't think we have access to that database.
I think some of the. So I don't want to cast aspersions on any particular actor in this conversation at the state level. But the background on this is interesting because it is a bill that was passed twice by the legislature and vetoed and ended up becoming a law because a veto was overridden, which sometimes creates a situation where an administration is not inclined to make it especially user-friendly or invest in it. Is that
Nice way
is
of
it fair? Yes. Yeah. Right. Right. Neil,
As I understand it, the legislation would has required that anyone who rents or use like your Airbnb, all those web-based opportunities, you can't be on those web-based unless you register. So how the law is written is it went behind the scenes and went to the web-based organization.
Gotcha.
So you can't use a web-based unless you prove or somehow you register
Right.
with the state.
don't leave, David, but I want to ask Neil, because you're the one most likely to be able to answer this. How are the Airbnbs taxed? Do they pay, because like I know as an innkeeper, you are required probably to collect at least 3 different taxes, right? There's probably a room tax. Yeah. But does that apply to Airbnbs as well? Because
You know,
there's.
I'm not 100%, but what I was going to share is the Tourism Council gets the report of all of the web services, the 1% that comes back. So you could back into what's going on in Block Island based on that if they're registered with one of them.
I see.
Doesn't give you data who it is and what they're renting, but there is a way to quantify the amount that's out there dollar wise. If you back into what we're getting from the state through that, and Jess gets that every month. But I'm not sure they pay the 13% because I'm not on those. So.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we need. And we need a chart of all of these various taxes, what applies to what, because I think we can all talk about it forever, but, and then somebody remembers, oh, there's a percent, like the tourism is a good example, the percentage of the percentage that gets split up and by the time,
Right,
I used to know that stuff, but if you don't do it all the time.
So I tell you what, my initiatives, we had, when we passed this, student tax rule, 6 years ago, we had to go to 59, and I collected 7% sales tax, I collected every month. I collected from my tenants, paid 7% sales tax that I collected, 1% seasonal rental tax, and as well as 1% for all. But anyway, the point is I paid those two taxes that were part of the, that's my ongoing.
Yeah, an example.
What's that?
So
You're a rule follower. You're not a good example.
That's right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Great. We have, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
well, no, I was going to say, to answer your question, there were some representatives from Airbnb that came out here about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, pre-COVID.
Mm.
Anyway, and they do collect the tax. and they remit it to the state, and it does
Gotcha.
not get, it does, like, there is no line that's going to come through anywhere that says, so the question really is, it gets remitted to the state, and the question that we could never get answered is, does the state send it the pieces, the portions
Those
that
portions,
that Block Island normally gets, do they
Right.
send them back to Block Island?
Right.
And that we couldn't get the information on. But
They do,
historically,
because
the,
Jen's.
Hi, David.
Jess is
Have fun in
funded
Florida.
by that.
okay,
So she gets a quarterly or a monthly report that shows everything coming in and the percentage that's funding her budget, basically.
right, but I'm just saying the Airbnb piece that goes directly to the state, that was, they couldn't answer that. But anyway, so historically, everybody can rent, like we talked about, 2 rooms. Our zoning allows that.
Right.
Airbnb gets in a lot of trouble in a lot of towns because most towns don't allow that, right? We do allow that. We are set up for Airbnb. What happened was we used to have quite a few people, mostly older widows, who rented 2 rooms out here. And the state used to have a law that if you only rented 2 rooms, you didn't have to collect taxes. You didn't have to collect or remit taxes. And then the state changed that rule. And we lost all of those rooms because it was too much. Like I said, it was mostly older widows, and that was just too much
Yeah.
bookkeeping for them.
Right.
So we lost a lot of rooms on the island because of that.
interesting.
So,
That's fascinating history. I didn't know that. So I'll throw out some of the ones that I've thought of as priorities. One is sort of housing writ large with this transition at the state's housing department underway. I actually have some experience with Stefan Pryor when he worked for the state of Connecticut. He is a doer. So I would expect this session a lot of things to be happening around housing. I think he was clearly, if you've been following it in the media, particularly the Providence Journal, I think he was likely the pick of the speaker and the Senate president as well. So I think there may be some more consensus forged, and I think we need on our agenda to be paying attention to housing bills, especially where we are a square peg, where our very nature will preclude either by size or by demographic makeup or whatever may preclude us from accessing potentially available funds for housing. Second thing is by not re-entering the federal consent order around mopeds, we now are free to seek legislation on mopeds. And I don't know what shape or form that might or should or could take. We are in front of the Supreme Court on our own ordinance, so I think it would be a challenging legislative environment. I can tell you from professional experience to go to legislators and say, "Hey, we'd like you to pass this," and they say, "Yeah, and the Supreme Court is still cases." But I do think it's important to carry as a primary item on our agenda and potentially develop legislation at the very least to have heard so that we can have our community heard on this issue.
I think it's also very important to keep an eye on anything else that might
Yeah,
happen.
really, absolutely. That's the mirror image of that is just as important. Yeah. The other part, I just wrote down 2 words, and that is school finance. It's only been 2 years for me, but I've noticed, and part of this is by osmosis, sitting next to Martha for my entire time on the council. we have to be mindful, actually, it's part of the reason I enjoy it. We have to be mindful of, uh, school financing opportunities, places where we may not be getting, places where our unique circumstance, may put us in a situation where we need to ask for different treatment. I don't have anything especially hard under that. And then, let's sort of throw it on the table. We all attended a school board meeting a month or so ago where it was revealed that our school is now a 2-star school. And I wonder whether that kind of a situation enables us to get some remediation money to accelerate our school district improvement. So anyway, I just have generally school finance. Those are mine.
Anybody else? Keep going. So last time, fire and rescue in the fire barn, got pretty close. Matter of fact, I thought it was gonna get over the line. And Marianne, I don't know if it was just sort of quietly dropped or where some of that funding went, but yeah, how it had.
It was a request we
Yeah.
made, and it made it through stage 1, and it didn't get out of the committee.
So fire and rescue should be back up on it, in my opinion. The other, again, in consideration for what we want to prioritize. The other one is berm, which, I don't know, Marianne, how much should be grants or whether there's somewhere between environmental, which gets into composting and recycling or dealing with things, safety. I mean, there's so many areas we could possibly go on berm that I think we should put a package together from a legislative point of view. And then the last one I have, and again, there's a lot of talk about it, is about water and our municipal water. And I don't know if there's any way from the health and safety point of view, Department of Health, special legislative support for expanding, availing more water at the water company. And I just want to put that on the list.
I just want to say from health and safety, our water is very safe. And so we'd be looking more from an economic angle, I think.
It's not, I think you're talking two things. I think we're talking about the capacity, the ability to provide, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about safety, isn't it? Because the water's, we all know the water's not what it used to be. Thank God. Do you want to go in with plastic? Do you want to go in with plastic? I think we should do that locally.
But that's a different.
Yeah, I just want to be sure what we weren't talking about, doing something state.
I mean, I assume that there will be.
I think if we did it here, there would be no, because we all know the legislature, for all of their talk, doesn't get anything done until
Exactly.
the, summer's upon
Yes.
us. And they're having arguments or discussions or whatever on Nantucket. Like, we don't
Yes.
know about this.
Yes.
There's nothing more fun than watching what happens in a bigger, fancier, richer town that still goes off the rails.
All right, here's what I have. I was going to text this to you, Laurel, if it's helpful. Housing, tax restructuring, moped, school finance, water infrastructure, fire, public safety. What am I missing? Yep.
firm on there, but I don't know whether that's either ready and or what we would go after.
Yes,
Well, I was thinking.
things,
state or
issues that we're
federal.
gonna have to track. Yeah. Tell us what you think. From your face, we're doing something wrong.
I guess I'm confused. I thought we were talking about legislation that we would like to present to the General Assembly this year. I know we're also talking some federal legislation, so.
So,
So when I see how, like water, what water legislation are you looking?
so I think there are at least two buckets here, probably
Okay.
three. But if we just assume that state and federal are one bucket. The tax restructuring is an actual piece of legislation
Right.
that we would want to seek.
Yep, that I get.
Mopeds is potentially
Yep.
a piece
Yep.
of legislation
Yep.
that we might seek. Housing is a wait and see, unless Cindy or someone else says we could really, we'd really like the state to do X or Y, but that's one that has to be on May 4th's screen. Water infrastructure, fire and public safety, the Maritime Center are largely potential for appropriations either at
Okay,
the state or federal
All right.
level.
that's where,
And
okay.
and waste management, I think, I don't want to speak for Sven here because he raised it, but waste management falls into that, presumably with all of the stuff that's going on or not going on with Johnston, we are going to have to be engaged in how, what direction the state's waste management policies move. So I put that more on our radar screen, May 4th radar screen for tracking and engagement, potentially. So that's how I see those breaking out. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think roll back to mopeds and
Yes.
actually take mopeds out of it. Everything else that is increasingly a problem and I don't see it getting any better. The scooters, the
three wheels.
the problem with
ATVs.
the electric bikes that have no requirement whatsoever for anybody to have any kind of training. This whole hate to use the word menu of potential disasters flying the roads every day. I mean, if the mopeds disappeared tomorrow,
We'd still
everybody would be really astonished at how much difficulty in traffic there still was. And we've got to disabuse ourselves of this nonsense that there's any silver bullet anywhere for anything.
That's a great point.
And this would be, that's an excellent point, and that is something that came up at police advisory a lot. People constantly wrote in letters about that. But it would be a really good one to talk over with our state senator, Alana DeMario, because they are having the same problem in Narragansett.
Yes.
And she was like, it's just, she said, they have a problem, it's everywhere, but in these like tourist communities, right? So they are also a tourist community. And then, people buy them for their kids, but they wear them without helmets and the accidents are terrible. Very debilitating.
Molly,
So-
it was an issue in Melbourne, Australia last week when we were there. There are these electric scooters everywhere and they're all sort of these, you join a company like Line, and you basically got a scooter anywhere you want, and they're all over.
And the problem is they leave them on the sidewalk. pull
Yeah,
it over.
Yeah. So I think it would be helpful, Marianne. I don't know whether this is the approach, but to Martha and Molly's point, is the Rhode Island League of Cities going to engage on it, because if I recall correctly from what Matt Moynihan said, and I remember, Sven, you telling me that was one of the things that Matt Moynihan said to you on his way out, that the thing that is keeping him awake, if you will, are these vehicles, in quotes, that are not statutorily
And there's no regulation. for 'em.
vehicles. So there's no licensing, there's no
Registration.
Yeah, there's
You could be
no-
14 years old and
yes.
have one of those electric scooters,
So
12
it-
years.
And as Molly's saying, we're not the only ones
No.
who are seeing this. So it would be interesting if to see whether the league is doing anything that we could join, because I do worry. I mean, I racked my brain for one rainy day on whether there was anything we could do as a council to regulate those things. And I think that would be chancy. Now, we may go with the League of Cities to try to get the legislature to enable municipalities, to do their own thing.
But we have taken steps on skateboards downtown.
Yep.
So I'm just saying, it's
Yeah,
not necessarily
yeah, no,
enforced,
it's-
so we have done it in the past.
Didn't the town council several years ago prohibit like those rental scooters, like like Lime? I thought you guys did.
I don't know. I don't know.
Do you have any idea?
That I don't.
Millie might, but I thought, do you have any recollection of that, Kim? For some reason, I felt like that was a conversation several years ago. Okay, well, maybe we should.
The specificity is what's probably going to plague us. We've got to have some big blanket thing that's going to cover everything. And I mean, Narragansett is having problems. Newport's had problems. Is there a coalition of coastal towns? I don't think there is. Or is there, that we just
Well,
don't belong
I-
to?
I think maybe what could be. And Keith is serving on this particular,
Does that, have you found it yet?
that's,
So, the
Um,
amount of time that this thing has taken is. No. They
Um,
won't respond.
and,
We can't find it.
and I'm going to introduce Keith to another gentleman.
I am
Oh.
the
South
the
County,
designee of
Washington County.
yeah, the designee of the town to serve on the Washington County Regional Planning Agency. And when I was appointed, Millie reached out to them and I reached out to them, and we haven't heard anything. But fortunately, Mary Ann bumped into somebody who's like really actively engaged there. So,
It was, he was sitting at our table at the new,
oh, that's right. It was
at the
thing he
new,
attended. Yes.
leadership orientation. I reached out to him. I said, is this a good email from you? And I got a response back from him. He said, yes. So now I'm going to introduce Keith and this gentleman because they were looking at some pretty significant funding opportunities that
Yeah.
they thought would be beneficial. And maybe that's where they can have some of these discussions. And also the league,
I didn't even know when they were.
Well, Andre had the same problem. I couldn't
Yes.
find him.
Anything else to add?
Probably.
Things will come up, but Molly especially has been, I think, really paying attention. She and I go back and forth with articles a lot, but about areas where there are fee opportunities, for lack of a better description, right? When is that fair? I don't want to speak for you, but and I don't necessarily think it should be on our formal legislative agenda, but I do think it's something we should be mindful of as we kind of move forward. That is, are we? You and I have talked about this as well, so I'm like, are we? Does our fee structure, appropriately reflect the impacts on the community.
I would just say, before you go to town on that, check on any kind of statutory
Yes.
regulations, because we did this years and years and years ago.
Yeah.
And basically everything we had on our list
Was
was,
already controlled.
no, you can't do that.
Yes, already controlled.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Were you around that? You can't,
Yeah. Yeah.
no, that was, oh, that was something else, the impact fee. That's unrelated. When, this is kind of vaguely, vaguely connected to all of this. We used to, it was like, wasn't the Ocean View when they were trying to rebuild something up there? Was that the one where they had the impact fee with the planning board? It wasn't impact fee, I'm sorry. It was, having the developer fund the study on, it wasn't, I don't think it. No, the traffic's something else. That's on my dining room table right now. You see overall reviewing the project, hiring special people to review the project. And we don't have many things like that now, but we might.
Yeah.
We sort of lost track of that sort of thing.
Well, it's very easy to say, we should have fees for X, Y, Z, and, you know, it's kind of, and they're either prohibited or they're capped or, you know, yeah. All right, so we have the skeleton, right?
Yeah, can I jump in really quickly?
Please.
So what I'm going to read, I'm just going to read this really quickly, and they were the priorities of the leagues of cities and towns. for
Oh, terrific.
2022.
Yes.
So they'll probably update
Yes.
this. So just let me read them, not the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm just going to read the headline. Funding for transportation infrastructure resiliency. Yeah. Workforce management. Property taxes. And, you know, there's more stuff as it. Education aid. Fiscal restraint, and fiscal success. Housing and land use. Local control. And that's what they had. So those few I just read off, you ticked off about 3 or 4 what we have on this list for you.
Just goes to show you it's not rocket science. Everybody
No,
does the
so
same
where I'm going,
stuff.
so how they do this, they survey local communities
Yeah.
and they say this is what they want. So, to answer your, I guess Keith's question, yeah, the League of Cities and Towns is very active, and what you'll probably find is what we're talking about here.
I just think, I assume you get stuff regularly from them, but, you know, if, for example, they're pursuing legislation around potential regulation of these sort of electric non-vehicle vehicles, and they're doing a hearing, Martha and I could go up and talk about our experience here.
Right, and
Yeah.
if you remember correctly, last year, there was a couple of pieces of legislation that was introduced at the General Assembly, and it brought it to you folks and asked
Yes.
you to provide a resolution. And the League of Cities and Towns gave us samples of those resolutions and stuff like that. So
Yes.
they'll be very active.
Terrific. That's great.
So,
That's great. So if there's nothing further on that, Laurel, you have what you need to, so would you mind at some point before the 27th, just sort of sending that list around to people? Because we want it to us, because we're going to want to talk to Tina about that next Friday. So I just think it would be helpful. So we're all starting on the same page there. Does that make sense?
yes, that does. But really quickly here, we talked about having our lobbyists come
Yes.
next week. I do have a date.
Oh, you do? Great.
So the date that Rick put forward was the 26th.
Oh, okay.
Would you like me to schedule them at that point? And
Yeah, for as many people who can make it.
and I'll try to do it. I think there's an 11:30 vote, which gets them here at 12:30, and there's a 4:15 out, I think.
Oh, great.
Is it out? Let me double check that.
Thursday.
Yeah. Yeah, let me look at the Friday schedule. I just can't memorize it because it seems, it changes too much at this time.
No, I'm sorry. Of course you can. You get up here. I think very, I've spoken with both of them directly about that. Ian seen them all together and they work together regularly and well. Now Tina is new, but Tina was very well known to our to Mayforth because Mayforth does a lot of nonprofit work, and Tina's background is in I think home care or sort of voluntary health, sort of nonprofit healthcare. And they've worked really well with Alana as well. We sort of wanted to have, I think it's fair to say, Tina to ourselves when she comes out, to take her around and see things that the lobbyists have already seen and all that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah.
So I'll confirm times quick, because I'm sure it'll come out.
Okay. Does that, I just want to make sure I answered your question, Kim. Just Tina is coming. Yeah. Not because of a disinclination, but we should, because they actually work really well together. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. You're right. You're right. I hadn't done that. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll reach out to a lot. And for Kim, just so you know, she's also chair of the environmental. So it's good.
Yeah. Great. So you're gonna check on the times, but next Thursday afternoon. Good. Great. Excellent. Our final agenda item, it is now 6 o'clock. Rules of procedure, my changes or suggestions are largely technical, but I have, or drafting, but I have a number of them, and I don't know whether others do as well. I'm perfectly happy to have this on, one of our agendas in February, but whatever you think, guys. Okay.
Can I just ask a question?
Please.
So you're saying you have changes you want to make to what we have here?
Yes.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if these were your
And
changes.
no, they're not.
Okay.
These are, it was actually very helpful. This draft, the strike throughs, the new language were put together by, if I recall correctly, Marianne and Millie, to reflect changes that occurred, for example, in Open Meetings Act that occurred after these rules and procedures were adopted, literally years ago, to account for the charter changes on broadcast, et cetera. So it's actually in really good shape, I think. I have things like, do we have to, in rules of procedure, account for consent calendars? Do we have to, you know what I mean? Like, those are, my questions are things like that, not what the hell does this mean? But I just would urge you with that back, I'd really like to put this to bed at our next meeting, if we can, because it's now been on our agenda as the last item for three meetings in a row. And I've said it's 6 o'clock. Do we really want to do this? So let's first of all do it at our next meeting, and secondly, let's put it first. How's that? If nobody has anything further, accept a motion to adjourn. Yes. That was seconded by Neil. I don't know whether you heard that. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye. Opposed, no. We're adjourned.